Drop the name of your city in the comments below, and stay with me all the way to the end, because this one surprised even me. The first thing people in Pincher Creek said about Owen Mallory was that he hadn't smiled since his father's funeral. The second thing they said was that he'd had 6 women come to that ranch of his over the past 4 years, and every single one of them had left before the first frost. Not because he was cruel. That was the part nobody could quite explain. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make impossible demands. He simply went about his days like a man who had already decided, somewhere deep and unreachable, that warmth was a luxury he could no longer afford. The women he'd brought out, through the notices in the Calgary paper, through a distant cousin's recommendation, through one particularly ill-fated arrangement made at a church social in Lethbridge, all of them said roughly the same thing when they left. He's not unkind, he's just somewhere else. You can't reach him. You feel invisible standing right next to him, and that, everyone agreed, was a particular kind of loneliness. Worse, some said, than being alone outright. Rosalind Vane had read exactly none of this when she answered the notice. She'd been living in a rented room above a dry goods store in Medicine Hat, working alterations for a seamstress named Mrs. Birch, who paid just enough to keep Rosalind from thinking too hard about the future. She was 28 years old. She had a small leather satchel, a sewing kit her mother had left her, and a habit of getting very quiet when things felt unsteady. Not cold, not distant, just quiet, like a person who had learned early that speaking into silences only made them larger. The notice had been straightforward: ranch in the Crowsnest Pass region, seeking a capable woman, widower, no expectation of romance, practical arrangement only. There was a post office box in Pincher Creek and a name: Owen Mallory. She'd written back the same afternoon. She didn't dress it up. She didn't list her virtues or assure him she was easy to get along with. She wrote that she was handy with a needle and not afraid of hard work, that she'd grown up on a small farm outside of Swift Current before her parents passed, and that she understood what it meant to keep a place running with not enough hands. She mentioned that she did not require conversation to feel comfortable. She said she hoped that wasn't strange to say. He wrote back in 6 days, "Come if you want." That was the whole letter. She packed her satchel on a Tuesday and was on the train by Wednesday morning. The ranch sat at the foot of the Livingstone Range, and when the wagon crested the last hill and Rosalind saw it for the first time, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not dread, not relief, but a kind of recognition. The way you sometimes recognize a place you've never been, because it looks exactly like the feeling you carry around without a name for it. Wide and spare, and very, very quiet. Owen Mallory was waiting by the fence post near the gate. He was taller than she'd imagined, which she knew was a strange thing to have imagined at all. His hat was dark with old sweat at the band, his coat worn through at the left elbow, and he had the look of a man who had stopped noticing those things about himself some time ago. He watched the wagon come down the lane the way you watch weather, not with feeling, just with attention. He gave her a short nod when she climbed down. "Miss Vane, Mr. Mallory," and that was the beginning of everything. He showed her the house with the efficiency of a man showing someone where the tools were kept. Kitchen here, pump out back, the stove needed coaxing in the morning, there was a loose board on the second step that he hadn't gotten to. Her room was at the end of the hall, small but clean, with a window that looked east so she'd have the morning light. He did not ask her if it was satisfactory. She did not tell him it was the nicest room she'd had in 3 years. She unpacked her satchel and went downstairs and started on supper because it was nearly 6 o'clock, and there was a pot on the stove and dried beans soaking in a bowl beside it, and it seemed like the obvious thing to do. He came in at 7:30, washed his hands at the pump, sat down, and ate without speaking. She ate across from him without speaking. When he was done, he said, "Thank you," and went to the sitting room, and she washed the dishes and went upstairs. She lay awake in the eastern-facing room for a long time, not unhappy, just turning the day over in her mind the way you turn a stone to see what's underneath. This is a manageable thing, she thought. I can do this. What she hadn't counted on was his ranch hand. His name was Percy Good, and he was 63 years old, and deeply constitutionally unable to stay quiet for more than 4 minutes at a stretch. He arrived the first morning before sunrise to help with the horses, and by the time Rosalind had come down to start the stove, he was already sitting at the kitchen table helping himself to the biscuits she'd set out the night before, telling the story of a horse he'd known in 1908 that could open latches with its teeth. He stopped when he saw her. "Oh, you're still here. Should I not be?" He squinted. "The last one made it 9 days. I've only been here one." Well, he took another biscuit. "There's something to you, I think. Can't say what yet." Percy became, in a completely unplanned way, the person who translated the ranch for her. Not Owen. Owen didn't explain things. He simply did them and assumed you'd either follow or you wouldn't. But Percy walked her through the routines, the particular moods of each horse, the fact that the northwest pasture gate stuck in the rain, the way Owen took his coffee, black, no sugar and scalding, which Percy said was the only extravagance the man permitted himself. He wasn't always like this, Percy told her one afternoon, mending a bridle at the work table while she restitched a tear in one of Owen's work gloves. Before his father passed, he was, well, not cheerful, exactly. He's never been what you'd call cheerful, but present. You know? Like he was actually standing in the room with you. Rosalind kept her eyes on the glove. What happened to his father, Hart, 2 winters ago? Percy was quiet a moment. Owen found him out by the south barn. It was cold. He'd been there a while. He set the bridle down. Owen didn't come inside for 2 days after that. Slept in the barn. We didn't push him. She didn't ask anything else. She thought about a man lying in the cold beside his father's body and not knowing how to come indoors. She understood that, actually. Not the same way, not the same story, but the shape of it. The way grief sometimes made the outside world feel more honest than the inside of a house. She thought about it for the rest of the afternoon. 3 weeks in, she made a mistake. It was a small one, practically speaking. She'd misunderstood which field he'd said needed the fence line checked, and she'd spent the better part of a morning in the wrong pasture, which meant the work he'd actually needed done wasn't done when he came back at noon. He stood in the kitchen doorway looking at her, and she looked back at him, and she said, "I went to the east field. I misheard you." He said nothing for a moment. She didn't fill the silence. She'd learned, in those 3 weeks, that he wasn't building to something when he was quiet. He was actually thinking, which was rarer than it should have been in her experience. She waited. "I should have been clearer," he said, and that was all. She'd expected something harder. She'd worked for people who used small mistakes as proof of something larger, as evidence of what they'd always suspected about you. Owen Mallory just looked at the problem, assigned it a cause, and moved on. She found herself thinking about that at odd moments, the plainness of it. It was the garden that undid her slightly. She'd noticed the beds along the south side of the house were full of dead growth, not abandoned exactly, but stopped. Like someone had been tending them and then simply hadn't anymore. She asked Percy about it one morning, careful to keep her voice easy. "His mother's," Percy said. "She died when Owen was 12. He used to keep them up. Used to, mind you. Maybe 5 years ago he just stopped going over there." Rosalind looked at the beds for a long moment. She didn't ask Owen. She didn't mention it. But the following Saturday, when she had a free hour after the morning work, she went to the garden shed and found a spade and some wire fencing, and she started clearing. Not all of it. She didn't want to startle anything. She cleared one small corner, turned the soil, and planted 6 onion sets she'd picked up in town. She didn't tell him. He found out on his own 2 days later. She was at the kitchen window when she saw him stop on his way in from the barn, standing at the edge of the garden, looking at that small cleared corner. He stood there for a long time. She couldn't see his face. He came inside and washed his hands. He sat down for supper and said, "You cleared that corner. I had some onion sets." He looked at his plate. Then he said, "There's a box of seed packets in the shed. On the top shelf, my mother's writing on the envelopes." Rosalind nodded. "You can use them," he said. "If you want," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Mallory." And something shifted, just slightly, like a door that had been left ajar for so long you'd stopped noticing it, and then someone opened it a few more inches and the light changed. The argument, when it came, was not what she expected. It was late October. A man from the neighboring property, a rancher named Clifton Wade, who had a wide smile and a habit of saying of course to everything in a way that made nothing feel certain, rode over one afternoon while Owen was fixing the hay rake. Rosalind was bringing lunch out to the yard when Wade reined in his horse and tipped his hat at her and said, loud enough for Owen to hear that it was a funny thing, wasn't it? How Mallory always managed to find himself a woman willing to do the keeping up while he stayed closed off as a frozen creek. He laughed when he said it, like it was a joke between old friends. Owen didn't look up from the rake. Rosalind set the lunch pail on the fence post and looked at Wade. "That's a strange thing to say about a man's home," she said. Wade blinked. "Beg your pardon? I said it's strange." Her voice was even, not hard. She wasn't performing anything, she was just saying what she thought. "You rode over here in the middle of a workday to say something unkind about someone you know isn't going to answer back. I'm not sure what you were hoping for." There was a silence. Wade's smile got thin. He looked at Owen, who had finally looked up from the rake. "Just a bit of fun," Wade said. "Sure," Rosalind said. "Help yourself to the ride back." Wade left. She picked up the lunch pail and brought it to Owen. He took it and didn't say anything for a moment. She started to turn back toward the house. "Rosalind." It was the first time he'd said her given name. She stopped. "You didn't have to do that," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at her steadily, seriously, with the look of a man who was saying something that cost him. "I know," she said. "I wanted to." She went back to the house. She stood at the kitchen counter for a moment, with her hands flat on the wood and her eyes on the far wall, and she thought, "Careful." Not because she was afraid. Because she wasn't. November came, and the temperature dropped, and there were 2 days of early snowfall that kept them both inside, more than either of them was accustomed to. Percy didn't come those days. The road from his place was iced over, and so it was just the two of them, and the sound of the stove and the wind off the range coming under the door. Owen read. He had a small stack of books he went through methodically, and she'd noticed he read the way he did most things, thoroughly, without fanfare, apparently unbothered by silence. She sat at the kitchen table in the evenings with her sewing, and he sat across the room with his book, and neither of them said much, and it was not uncomfortable. It surprised her, that part. She had expected it to feel like obligation. Two people stuck in a room together, enduring. It didn't feel like that. It felt like something quieter, something she didn't have a good word for. Company, without performance. Presence, without demand. On the second evening of snow, he looked up from his book. "You lived in Medicine Hat before this," he said. "Yes, do you miss it?" She considered that honestly. "Not the room," she said. Mrs. Birch was kind. "I miss her a little." He nodded. "Did you ever want to leave here?" she asked. She didn't know why she asked it. Sometimes things came out in those quiet evenings. He looked at the window, where snow was pressing soft and white against the glass. "Once," he said. "When I was about 19, I was going to go to Vancouver, work on the docks, see something different." He paused. "My father needed help with the calving that spring. And then I just stayed." He said it without bitterness. That was the thing. Not resignation, not regret, just the plain statement of how a life arranges itself. "Do you wish you'd gone?" she asked. He thought about it, which she appreciated. He didn't give her a quick, comfortable answer. "No," he said finally. "I think I belong to this place. Not sure it's a choice exactly." She looked down at her sewing. "I think that's a good thing to know about yourself." He looked at her for a moment longer than usual. Then he went back to his book. She kept her eyes on her needle and thread, and did not let herself think too clearly about the feeling in her chest, which was new and specific, and somewhat inconvenient. It was Percy who finally said what nobody was saying. He did it, typically, sideways, and in the middle of something else. They were in the barn together in early December, and she was helping him repair the stall gate while he talked. Percy was always talking. It was as natural as breathing, and he was in the middle of a story about a cattleman's dance in Fort Macleod in 1987 when he said, without any transition at all, "You know he watches the door when you go out." Rosalind looked at the gate. "What?" "Owen. When you go out to the garden or into town. He doesn't make a fuss about it, but he watches the door." Percy hammered a nail in. "I've been on this ranch 20 years. I've never seen him watch a door." She didn't say anything. "I'm not telling you what to do with that," Percy said cheerfully. "I'm just reporting what I see. I'm something of an observer." "You're something of a meddler," she said. "That too," he agreed. She thought about that for a long time afterward. She thought about it while she was checking the fence line. She thought about it while she was cooking. She thought about it in the eastern-facing room at night, watching the moon come up over the Livingstone Range. She didn't let herself want things she wasn't sure of. She'd learned that the hard way, in the years before Medicine Hat, in a situation she never talked about. A man who had said all the right things and meant none of them, and left her with a clear-eyed wariness that she thought of, on good days, as earned wisdom. Owen Mallory had said almost nothing, and she trusted him more than she'd trusted anyone in years. That was worth being careful with. The conversation happened on a Thursday, which she hadn't expected. She'd somehow imagined that if anything happened between them, it would be a dramatic moment, a storm or a crisis, or some occasion that gave it the weight it deserved. It was just a Thursday. She'd been thinking about spring. Her contract, such as it was, had no formal end. Owen had never specified how long the arrangement was meant to run, and neither had she, and it had been sitting in the back of her mind like an unread letter. She'd started to think she should probably address it, set something clear. She'd been in uncertain situations before, and she knew the particular anxiety of not knowing where you stood. She found him in the yard after supper, stacking wood in the last of the daylight. "I wanted to talk about the arrangement," she said. He set a log down and looked at her. "The spring," she said. "I don't know what you're expecting. I've been here since September, and we've never talked about I'd like you to stay," he said. Just like that, no preamble. She looked at him. He was looking back at her with that level, serious attention she'd come to recognize. The look that meant he was saying exactly what he meant and nothing more or less. "For how long?" she asked. He picked up another log, set it on the pile, and said without looking away, "I don't know how to say this well, so I'm just going to say it plainly. All right, I don't want a contract. I want." He stopped. He looked like a man pushing a door that didn't open easily. "I've been keeping myself at a distance from things for a long time. From people. I thought that was the right way to manage. Keep the walls in good repair." He paused. "You never tried to come over those walls." She waited. "You just went about your life, right here. And somehow that was the thing that—" He stopped again. "Made you look up," she said quietly. He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. The yard was very still. The mountains were going dark at their edges and the first stars were coming through. She said, "I've been careful for a long time too. I know. I'm not going to stop being careful," she said, "just so you know that." Something moved across his face then. Not quite a smile, but close. The precursor to one. She thought it might be the first time she'd seen it on him, that expression, and it changed the whole geography of his face. "That's all right," he said. "I'm not in a rush." She exhaled, slowly. "Okay," she said, "then I'll stay." He nodded. He picked up the next log, and then he stopped and said, "Rosalind." She was already turning back to the house. She stopped. "Thank you," he said, "for the garden." She knew he didn't mean just the garden. She knew he meant the corner she'd cleared, and the onion sets and the seed packets with his mother's handwriting, and the entire quiet accumulation of ordinary mornings. And she felt something pull warm and certain in the middle of her chest. "You're welcome, Mr. Mallory," she said. "Owen," he said. She smiled. Just a small one, with her back still half to him. "Owen," she said. And she went inside. They married in March in the living room, with Percy as witness and a justice of the peace from Pincher Creek, who smelled of wood smoke and kept losing his place in his notes. Percy cried, which surprised no one who knew him, and denied it immediately, which also surprised no one. Owen held her hand during the ceremony with the same steadiness with which he did everything. Seriously, completely, without performance. When it was done and the justice had packed up his papers and gone, Owen turned to her and said, with his hand still in hers, "I want to get it right. What I want to get it right." "You're already getting it right," she told him. "That's the thing you don't know yet." Percy, loudly blowing his nose in the corner, said that was the finest thing he'd ever heard, and they should put it on a plaque. Owen looked at him. "I'm not crying," Percy said. "It's the dust." "It's March," Owen said. "There's no dust." "Unusual March," Percy said. She laughed, a real one, from somewhere unguarded, and Owen looked at her when she laughed, and something in his face went fully open, the way a window does when you've been waiting all winter to let the air through. The garden, that first spring, came back in a way that felt almost excessive in its enthusiasm. The onion sets she'd planted in October threw up long green shoots in April. The seed packets from the shed, she'd gone through them carefully over the winter. His mother's handwriting, small and precise on each envelope, yielded sweet peas and a sprawling stand of cosmos and, improbably, a row of sunflowers that got so tall by August that Percy said they could be seen from the road. Owen built a proper fence around the garden in May. He did it without being asked. She watched him from the kitchen window one morning, setting the posts, and she thought about the man Percy had described, the one who hadn't come inside for 2 days after his father died. She thought about all the winters that had settled into him, one after another, until he'd become someone people described as a frozen creek. She thought about what it meant that he was out there, in the May morning, building a fence around something growing. She went out with 2 cups of coffee and handed him one. He took it. He looked at the fence posts. He said, "I was thinking of adding a gate on the east side, so you have a closer way in from the road." "That's a good idea," she said. They stood together in the morning, not talking, not needing to, with the mountains behind the ranch and the Crowsnest wind coming soft down the slope, and the coffee warm in her hands, and this life, this particular ordinary life, opening out ahead of them like a field after rain. She didn't know exactly what she'd been looking for, back in that rented room above the dry goods store, when she'd read a plainly worded notice in a Calgary paper and written back the same afternoon. But she thought, standing in the garden with the man who had started building fences around growing things, she thought maybe this was it. Not a grand answer, just a true one, and she had learned, a long time ago, that true was better.